They thought he was just an old black man, until he called his son and showed them who he really was. Walter Johnson held the phone to his ear as two mall security guards approached with stern expressions. At 63, wearing his faded grey sweater and simple pants, he knew exactly what was happening. "Say, sir, I need you to come with us," said Brian, the younger guard, already extending his hand as if expecting immediate compliance. Walter remained calm, but his heart raced. This wasn't the first time. He took a deep breath and continued. The call. "Son, you need to come here now. I'm at Oakbrook Mall." "Yes, again." His voice carried a mix of weariness and urgency that only years of similar experiences could produce. "What are you doing here?" Kevin, the other guard, crossed his arms. "We got a complaint that you were bothering customers." "Bothering?" Walter almost laughed but kept his composure. He had just been sitting on a bench near the food court, waiting. "My son is on his way," Walter replied, slipping the phone into his pocket. "We can handle this civilly." Brian rolled his eyes. How many times had he heard that one, old men making up stories to avoid being kicked out? "Look, we don't want trouble, but you need to leave. Management got complaints." "What? Complaints?" Walter asked, his voice steady with a dignity time couldn't erase. "For sitting? For being black? For looking poor?" The guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't how they wanted the conversation to go, but orders were orders. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now back to the story. Barbara Miller watched from a distance. At 67, the owner of a small craft store in the mall, she knew this scene all too well. She approached slowly, pretending to adjust a nearby display. "Brian, Kevin, what's the issue here?" she interjected, her voice motherly but firm. "Mrs. Miller, you don't need to get involved." Kevin tried to dismiss her with a wave. "It's just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Walter repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "It's always a misunderstanding until they find out who I really am." Barbara noticed something in the man's eyes. Not fear or anger, but a deep sadness mixed with resolve. She'd seen many looks in her life, but this one was different. "Did you even ask his name?" Barbara questioned the guards. "Why? Bother! The order is clear." Brian started but was cut off by a strong voice from the main corridor. "Dad!" Everyone turned. A man around 35, dressed in a flawless suit, strode quickly toward the group. His Italian shoes clicked against the marble floor. "Michael?" Kevin's eyes widened. "Attorney Michael Johnson?" The city's most respected lawyer, known for defending the underprivileged, embraced Walter warmly. "Dad, are you okay?" Michael scanned his father's face for signs of distress. The guard's expressions changed instantly. Brian stepped back, his once authoritative hand now hanging awkwardly at his side. "Attorney Johnson, we didn't know," Kevin stammered. "Your father, he didn't say—" "My father shouldn't have to say anything." Michael cut in, his tone professional but laced with restrained emotion. "He has every right to be here like any other citizen." Barbara watched with growing interest. There was more to this than just another case of discrimination. Walter placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken words. "No need, Michael. They were just doing their job." "Job?" Michael was about to explode, but his father's look stopped him. That's when Barbara noticed. The way Walter held a briefcase under his arm, the way his eyes scanned the mall as if searching for something specific. This wasn't the posture of someone who was there by chance. "Mr. Johnson," she approached, ignoring the security guards. "Were you expecting someone?" Walter studied her for a moment before answering. "Actually, I was expecting something like this to happen," he said, a strange satisfaction in his voice. "This is the third time this month." Michael clenched his fists. He knew that tone in his father's voice all too well. It was the same one he used when about to reveal crucial evidence in a case. "Dad, what are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago." Walter opened the briefcase he was carrying. Inside were documents, photographs, and what looked like an old deed. "But first, I needed to be sure." Brian and Kevin exchanged nervous glances. Something in the situation had shifted drastically, and they no longer understood their role. "How you can go," Michael dismissed the guards with a wave. But be prepared. We'll be having a serious talk with mall management about their approach protocols." The two hurried off, leaving Walter, Michael, and Barbara in the now strangely empty hallway. "Your father is an interesting man," Barbara remarked, still trying to decipher the puzzle before her. "You have no idea," Michael sighed. "Dad, can we talk in private?" "Actually," Walter looked at Barbara, "I think you should hear this too. After all, it concerns the future of this mall." Barbara frowned. The mall's future? What could this seemingly ordinary man possibly have to do with that? Walter began walking toward the food court, his steps now carrying a confidence that hadn't been there minutes before. 40 years ago, he began, his voice taking on the tone of someone telling a long-held story. "My father, Franklin Johnson, owned all this land, 3 acres in what was then the outskirts of Chicago." Michael stopped abruptly. This was the first time he'd heard this story. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "The truth your grandmother made me promise to keep until the right moment," Walter continued walking. "And that moment, son, has finally come." Barbara followed in silence, sensing she was about to witness something extraordinary. The mall was busier now. Families strolling, young people chatting, all oblivious to the drama unfolding. They reached an area near the food court where a small indoor garden stood. Walter stopped in front of a commemorative plaque most people ignored. "Oakbrook Mall, established in 1983, he read aloud. "What it doesn't say here is that my father was forced to sell this land for next to nothing. Threats, pressure, forged documents. It was a different time, a different America." "My God," Barbara brought a hand to her mouth. "Are you saying that this mall was built on an injustice?" Walter finished. "Yes, and I have proof." Michael took the documents from his father's briefcase with trembling hands. There were original contracts, old photographs of the Johnson family on the farm, and most importantly, a clause in the sale contract everyone had overlooked. In the event of proven coercion or fraud, the property reverts to the original heirs. Michael read, his legal mind already processing the implications. "I spent 20 years gathering evidence," Walter revealed. "I found witnesses, documents in old records offices, even recordings. But I needed one more thing." "What?" Barbara asked, completely absorbed by the story. "I needed to prove that the pattern of discrimination still exists." Walter gestured toward the hallway where the security guards had been. "That the same mindset that stole from my father is still alive. 3 documented approaches on video, dozens of witnesses." Michael shook his head, torn between admiration and concern for his father. "You set yourself up as bait." "Someone had to make things right," Walter replied simply. "Your grandfather died believing he had failed the family. I promised your grandmother that one day the truth would come out." Barbara watched father and son, seeing in them not just 2 generations but 2 different ways of seeking justice. "And now," she asked, "what do you intend to do?" Walter smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun. But it wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of someone who had carried a burden for too long and finally saw a chance to set it down. "Now, Mrs. Miller, I'm going to do what my father couldn't. I'm going to reclaim what's rightfully ours, but not the way they did it." At that moment, Walter's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed drastically. "It's Gloria," he said to Michael, his voice suddenly tense. "Your mother. She said it was urgent." He answered quickly, and Barbara and Michael could see the color draining from his face as he listened. "I'm on my way," he said, before hanging up and looking at his son. "Margaret is in the hospital. My sister, she had a heart attack." Margaret. Barbara knew that name. Margaret Johnson was one of the most respected nurses at City General Hospital, known for never turning anyone away, regardless of whether they could pay. "Let's go," Michael said, already calling a car on his phone. "Barbara, I'm coming with you," she decided impulsively. "Something tells me this story is just beginning." On the way to the hospital, Walter clutched the AS folder to his chest like a talisman. 40 years of secrets, of quiet investigation, of promises made on deathbeds. Then now, just as he was finally ready to act, life had thrown him another curveball. "Dad," Michael said, focused on driving but with his mind in turmoil, "why did you never tell me any of this?" "Because you needed to build your own path," Walter replied, gazing out the window at the city that had changed so much since his father's time. "If you'd known the truth, you would have lived in anger, and anger doesn't build anything good." Barbara, sitting in the back seat, watched the interaction between father and son. There was so much left unsaid in that car, so many layers of family history unfolding. "But now you're angry," Michael observed. "No," Walter corrected. "Now I have purpose. It's different." They arrived at the hospital in record time. Walter practically ran through the halls, knowing the way by heart. How many times had he visited his sister during her shifts? How many conversations had they shared about their family's past? In room 307, Margaret was hooked up to monitors but conscious. Her eyes brightened when she saw her brother. "Walter," she said weakly, "did you do it?" He approached the bed, carefully taking his sister's hand. "I did, sis. I have all the proof." Margaret smiled, and there was peace in her tired face. Dad would be proud. Mom, too. It was then that Walter noticed. There were others in the room. 2 men and a woman, all well-dressed, all with tense expressions. "Walter," Margaret squeezed his hand, "these are Colonel Whitaker's grandchildren. They came to talk." Colonel Whitaker. The name hit Walter like a punch. The man who had orchestrated the seizure of his father's land. The man whose empire had been built on the suffering of others. "Mr. Johnson," the woman stepped forward. It was Catherine Whitaker. Walter recognized her from the business pages of the newspapers. "We need to talk about the documents you have." Michael positioned himself protectively beside his father. "Any discussion will go through the proper legal channels. We're not here to threaten." One of the men, who introduced himself as Matthew Whitaker, raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "We came to apologize and to propose a solution." Margaret coughed, drawing everyone's attention. "Walter, hear them out. For me." Barbara, who had stayed by the door, stepped in quietly and closed it behind her. Her intuition told her she was about to witness a historic moment. "We recently had discovered," Catherine began, visibly uncomfortable, "documents left by our grandfather. Confessions, really, about what he did to your family and others." "Others?" Walter asked, his voice dangerously low. 12 families in total," Matthew confirmed. "All lost their land through questionable methods. We're trying to make amends." "Amends," Walter repeated the word. "You think money can undo what was done? My father died believing he was a failure. My mother worked herself to the bone to support us. Margaret and I grew up hearing we were the children of a weak man who couldn't hold on to what was his." "Dad," Michael touched his shoulder, but Walter continued, "you built an empire on our tears, and now you want to buy our forgiveness." Catherine lowered her head. "No, we want justice, true justice." It was Margaret's turn to speak, her voice gaining strength despite her condition. "Walter, remember what Dad always said? That the land wasn't just ours, it belonged to everyone who needed it." Walter closed his eyes. He remembered. Franklin Johnson had been a man ahead of his time, dreaming of creating a cooperative where small farmers could thrive together. "What are you proposing?" he finally asked. "Turning the mall into a community center," Catherine revealed, "keeping the retail space but dedicating 60% to public services. Daycares, a health clinic, a cultural center, and a foundation managed by the affected families." Barbara couldn't contain herself. This would change the whole area." "It's the least we can do," Matthew added. "We know it doesn't erase the past, but it can build a better future," Margaret finished, looking at her brother. "Walter, it's what Dad would have wanted." Walter stared at the folder in his hands. 40 years of anger, investigation, and thirst for revenge. And now, "I need to think," he said finally, "and consult the other families." "Walter," Margaret called, "there's one more thing, something I never told you." Everyone in the room unconsciously leaned forward. "The day Dad signed the papers, he took me with him. I was only 7, but I remember. Before signing, he looked at Colonel Whitaker and said, 'One day the truth will prevail, and when it does, I hope your children will be better than you.'" Catherine swallowed hard, tears in her eyes. Seems he was a prophet. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, The silence in the room was thick, heavy with decades of pain and the faint possibility of redemption. It was broken by the sound of Michael's phone ringing. "Excuse me," he answered, stepping aside. His expression quickly shifted from irritation to shock. "What? Are you sure? Understood. I'm on my way." He hung up and looked at everyone. "That was my office. They just received a subpoena. Someone is contesting the legitimacy of Grandpa Franklin's documents. They claim he wasn't the true owner of the land." "Impossible," Walter exploded. "I checked every document. Who's contesting it?" Catherine asked, genuinely surprised. "A woman named Eleanor Thompson," Michael replied. "She claims to be the rightful heir to the land with documents dating back to 1915. The name hit Walter like a bolt of lightning. Eleanor Thompson. He had come across that name once in an old search, but had dismissed it as irrelevant. "This can't be a coincidence," Barbara observed. "Right when you were reaching an agreement." Margaret tried to sit up in bed, alarmed by the news. "Walter, do you know that name?" "I found it once," he admitted, "in an old deed. But the document said the Thompson family had sold the land to my grandfather in 1920. "We need to look into this right away," Matthew offered. "Our lawyers can—" "No," Walter cut him off. "This is a family matter. Michael and I will handle it." "Dad, you can't leave now," Michael protested. "Aunt Margaret needs—" "I'm fine," Margaret insisted. "Her to we. Go. Find the truth. Always the truth. Remember that." Catherine stepped closer to Walter. "Mr. Johnson, whatever you find out, our offer still stands. What our grandfather did was wrong, dispute or not." Walter studied her for a long moment before nodding. "We'll stay in touch." As they left the hospital, Barbara caught up with Walter and Michael. "Can I help in any way? I know a lot of old-timers in the area, people who might know something about the Thompsons." Walter hesitated, but something in the woman's sincere gaze convinced him. "Your help would be welcome, Mrs. Miller." Michael's office was downtown, a modern building that contrasted with the century-old history they were about to uncover. In the reception area, his secretary waited with a worried expression. "Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Thompson is waiting in the conference room. She brought a lot of boxes of documents." The three exchanged glances before heading down the hall. Through the glass of the conference room, they saw a woman in her 70s, elegantly dressed, surrounded by file boxes. When they entered, she looked up. Her piercing green eyes seemed to hold secrets from many lifetimes. "Walter Johnson," she said, not as a question but a statement. "You look just like your grandfather." "You knew my grandfather?" Walter asked, tense. Eleanor smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I did. We were children when we played together on the land we're now fighting over." She opened one of the boxes and pulled out an old sepia-toned photograph. In it, two children smiled at the camera, a black boy and a white girl holding hands in front of a large tree. "Albert Johnson and Eleanor Thompson, 1925, she said. "Before the world taught us we couldn't be friends." Walter took the photo with trembling hands. It really was his grandfather. He recognized him from the few portraits the family had kept. "What do you want?" Michael asked, in lawyer mode. "I want the truth," Eleanor replied. "The full truth. About the land, about what happened to our families, about the secrets our grandparents took to the grave." She pulled out a yellow document. "This is the original will of my great-grandfather, Colonel Augustus Thompson. He left the land to his only daughter, my grandmother. But there's a curious clause here." Barbara leaned in to read along with the others. "The lands of Old Mill Estate must remain united and serve the purpose of bringing people together, as promised to my dear friend Benjamin Johnson," Michael read aloud. "Benjamin Johnson?" "My great-grandfather," Walter murmured. "Albert's father." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "Our great-grandfathers were close friends. Benjamin had saved Augustus's life during a flood. In gratitude, they made a pact." She pulled out more documents, old maps, letters. The land was to be managed jointly by both families, a vision too progressive for the time. When my great-grandfather died, there was pressure from the family to break the agreement, but my grandmother honored her father's word. Until Colonel Whitaker showed up," Walter finished. the puzzle pieces starting to fall into place. He turned our families against each other, Eleanor continued. He forged documents, spread lies, created disputes where there was friendship. In the end, he got the land from both families. Barbara was stunned. So you're not enemies, you're victims of the same scheme. Why only come forward now? Michael questioned, still suspicious. Eleanor let out a deep sigh. Because, like Walter, I spent decades gathering evidence, and because I received an anonymous letter last week saying Walter Johnson was about to make his move, I thought it was time to join forces. Anonymous letter? Walter frowned. From who? I don't know. But whoever sent it knows details only. Someone very close to the original events would. She pulled the letter from her purse. It was written in shaky handwriting, like that of an elderly person. The time has come for the Johnson and Thompson families to honor their ancestors. Pact. The truth is buried beneath the old kapok tree. Look before it's too late. The kapok tree, Walter whispered. The tree in the photo. Is it still there? Barbara asked. It is, Eleanor confirmed. It's behind the mall, in an area that miraculously wasn't destroyed. I've always wondered why. Walter's phone rang. It was Gloria, his wife. Walter, where are you? Margaret's asking for you. The doctors. They say it's more serious than they thought. Conflict was clear on Walter's face. On one side, his sister needed him. On the other, a decades-old mystery waiting to be solved. Go, Eleanor said gently. Your sister needs you. The secrets have waited 70 years. They can wait a few more hours. I can go check the tree, Barbara offered. I work at the mall. I know every corner. I'll go with her, Michael decided. Dad, take care of Aunt Margaret. Whatever we find, we'll bring it straight to you. Walter nodded, torn but knowing it was the right choice. Be careful, he warned. If someone went through the trouble of sending that letter now, others might be interested too. As Walter returned to the hospital, Michael and Barbara headed to the mall with Eleanor. The contrast between Margaret's medical urgency and their historical search created a palpable tension. At the hospital, Walter found his sister's room full of people. Besides Gloria, relatives he hadn't seen in years were there. The news had spread. Walter, Margaret gripped his hand as he approached. I need to tell you something. About that day with Dad. Rest, sis, we can talk later. No, she insisted. There might not be a later. Listen, that day Dad didn't just take me. There was another person in the car. An elderly woman dressed in black. Walter felt a chill. Who was she? Dad called her Mrs. Beatrice. She said something before he signed the papers. She said, "The truth is kept where it all began. One day the children will finish what the parents couldn't." Gloria squeezed her husband's shoulder. "You think it was Beatrice Thompson," Walter murmured. "Eleanor's grandmother. My God, they knew the truth would come out one day." Meanwhile, at the mall, Barbara guided Michael and Eleanor through the service halls, away from curious shoppers. "It's this way," she said, opening a door to the back. "This area's restricted, but—" They stopped abruptly. Before them, majestic despite the years, stood the kapok tree. But they weren't alone. A man in his 80s was kneeling by the tree's roots, digging with his hands. "Sir?" Michael stepped forward cautiously. "What are you doing?" The old man lifted his head, and Eleanor gasped. Richard Whittaker. It was Colonel Whittaker's younger brother, the only family member who had refused to take part in the schemes. "Eleanor," he said in a hoarse voice, "you finally came. I've been waiting so long." "Waiting for what?" Barbara asked, confused. Richard stood up with difficulty, his clothes stained with dirt. "Waiting to fulfill a promise. I promised Beatrice and Franklin that when their children came, I'd be here to show them." He pointed to where he had been digging. A metal box was just beginning to emerge. "My brother thought he'd destroyed all the evidence, but Beatrice was clever. She buried the truth where he'd never think to look, right under his nose." Michael helped the old man finish unearthing the box. It was heavy and locked, but Richard pulled an old key from around his neck. "Beatrice gave this to me the day Franklin was forced to sign those papers. She said I'd know when to use it. With trembling hands, he opened the box. Inside, protected by plastic, were documents, photographs, and something no one expected. Cassette tapes. "Recordings," Eleanor whispered. "My grandmother had a recorder. It was a novelty back then." Michael picked up one of the tapes. The label read, "Confession of Arnold Whitaker, March 12, 1983. "My brother," Richard confirmed, "drunk, confessing to all his crimes. Beatrice was serving coffee in the house and recorded everything." This changes everything," Barbara said, but Richard wasn't finished. "There's more. Look at this." He pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside was a document that made everyone hold their breath. It was a contract, signed by Augustus Thompson, Benjamin Johnson, and Arnold Whitaker. "My brother was a minority partner," Richard revealed. "The three of them started a business together. When Augustus and Benjamin died, he forged documents to take everything. But this original contract proves the land belongs to the heirs of all three families." Eleanor had to sit on a tree root, overwhelmed by the revelation. 3 families. That's why the letter said to honor the pact. It wasn't just between the Johnsons and Thompsons. Michael's phone rang urgently. It was Walter. "Son, Margaret, she's asking for you. The doctors say there isn't much time." "We're coming, Dad, and we have something important to tell you." Richard gripped Michael's arm. "Go, I'll stay here and guard everything." "After waiting this long, I can wait a little longer." "No," Eleanor decided. "You're coming with us. No more secrets, no more separation. We go together." Barbara helped carry the box as the group hurried back to City General Hospital. On the way, Eleanor called Catherine Whitaker. "Catherine, it's Eleanor Thompson. You need to come to City General Hospital right now. And bring your brothers. We've found something about your Uncle Richard." At the hospital, Margaret's room felt too small for so many people. Walter held his sister's hand as she struggled to breathe. "Margaret," he said softly when Michael entered, "Michael is here, and he's brought answers." With visible effort, Margaret opened her eyes. She saw not just her nephew, but the whole group with him. So many people," she murmured. Richard stepped closer to the bed, tears in his eyes. "Margaret Johnson, you don't know me, but I knew your father. He was a good man, better than most of us deserved." Quickly, Michael explained what they'd discovered. With each revelation, Margaret's face seemed to grow more at peace. 3 families, she repeated. "Dad always said unity is strength. He knew." Catherine Whitaker arrived with her brothers in the middle of the explanation. The shock on their faces at seeing their Uncle Richard was unmistakable. "Uncle? We thought you were dead." "Dead to the family, maybe," Richard replied bitterly. "But alive for the truth." Margaret motioned for Walter to come closer. "Promise me one thing," she whispered. "Promise you'll use this for good. Not for revenge, for unity like Dad wanted." "I promise, sis, I promise." Margaret smiled and closed her eyes. The monitors began to beep. Doctors and nurses rushed into the room. But it was too late. Margaret Johnson passed away surrounded, not only by her family, but by the representatives of the 3 families whose destinies had been intertwined for nearly a century. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Margaret's funeral took place 3 days later. It was something. That stunned the entire town, the Johnson, Thompson, and Whitaker families together, paying tribute to the nurse who had dedicated her life to caring for others. During the wake, many stories were shared. Patients Margaret had helped, families she had comforted. But it was the story told by an elderly woman that left the deepest impact. "My name is Beatrice Sullivan," she introduced herself. "No, not Beatrice Thompson, but I was her friend. Margaret came to me 10 years ago asking about the past. I told her I knew nothing, out of fear. But she was patient, kind. She said one day the truth would have to come out, but it should happen with love, not hatred." Walter listened to every word, the weight of the promise he'd made to his sister growing heavier in his chest. After the funeral, the 3 families gathered. In Michael's office, the unearthed box sat at the center of the table, its contents spread out for all to see. "We need to listen to the recordings," Catherine said. As painful as it is to hear my grandfather's crimes, we need to know the full truth. Michael had managed to find an old device to play the tapes. Colonel Whitaker's voice filled the room, arrogant even in his drunken confession. The Johnsons were easy. All it took was threatening to burn their crops. But the Thompsons, I had to get creative. I spread rumors that Beatrice was having an affair with Franklin Johnson. In a small town in the 80s, that was enough to ruin reputations. Eleanor clenched her fists. Her grandmother had died with her name tarnished by a lie. The recording continued, detailing every manipulation, every forged document, every family destroyed. The best part is I made it all look legal. Contracts signed under duress are still contracts, right? And who would believe the word of a black man and a woman over mine? When the tape ended, the silence in the room was suffocating. "Monster," Matthew Whitaker finally said. "Our grandfather was a monster." "He was," Richard agreed, "and I was a coward for not standing up to him. But you can be different." Walter stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city carried on as usual, oblivious to the historic drama unfolding in that office. "The question is," he said at last, "what do we do now? We have the proof to overturn everything, reclaim the land, dismantle the Whitaker empire. It's what I've spent 40 years planning." "But," Eleanor sensed his hesitation, "but my sister made me promise to use this for good, for unity. And I've been thinking, what do we really want, justice or revenge?" Catherine stepped closer to him. "Mr. Johnson, we'd understand if you wanted revenge. We have the resources for compensation." "This isn't about money," Walter snapped, then took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. It's just, you don't understand. I grew up hearing we were inferior, that my father had failed. I watched my mother work 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I saw Margaret give up her own dreams to help the family. And it was all built on a lie." "So what do you suggest?" Matthew asked. It was Barbara who answered, surprising everyone. What if we did exactly what our great-grandparents wanted? A true partnership between the 3 families?" All eyes turned to her. "Think about it," she continued. "The mall exists. It's a reality. Tearing it down wouldn't bring the past back. But turning it into something that honors everyone's memory, the proposal we made before." Catherine realized the community center, but now with the 3 families managing it together. Eleanor nodded slowly. "My grandmother always dreamed of creating a school, a place where children from all backgrounds could learn together. My father wanted an agricultural cooperative," Walter added. "It might not make sense in a mall, but a farmer's market. And my great-grandfather," Richard surprised everyone. "Before he became corrupt, he wanted to build a hospital. Ironically, it was Margaret who fulfilled that dream in another way, caring for everyone regardless of their ability to pay." Michael, always practical, began taking notes. "Legally, it's possible. With the evidence we have, we can force a complete restructuring, but we'd need agreement from all the heirs." "How many of us are there?" Eleanor asked. "From the Johnsons, just me and my children," Walter replied. "Margaret had no children." "From the Thompsons, it's me and my 3 grandchildren," Eleanor said. "And from the Whitakers," Catherine looked at her siblings. "It's the 3 of us and Uncle Richard. But there are cousins." "Leave the cousins to me," Richard said firmly. "After 40 years of silence, I have a lot to say to the family." Over the following weeks, the news spread through the city like wildfire. The most important mall in the region was at the center of a historic dispute. Journalists began investigating, uncovering other families harmed by Colonel Whitaker. Walter found himself in the eye of a storm he hadn't anticipated. People he'd never met came forward with stories about their own grandparents, lost lands, ruined businesses. "You've opened Pandora's box," Gloria said one evening over dinner. "Maybe," Walter admitted. But Margaret was right. The truth needed to come out. Then came an unexpected visitor. A very elderly woman, leaning on a cane, appeared at their door. "Mr. Walter," she asked in a trembling voice. "I'm Elizabeth Montgomery. I was 16 when I worked in the Whitaker household. I have something that belongs to your family." She pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from her bag. Inside was a golden pocket watch. "It belonged to your grandfather, Albert. The colonel took it the day he signed the papers." I've kept it all these years, hoping to return it. Walter took the watch with shaking hands. On the lid, an inscription, "To Albert, with love. Benjamin Johnson, 1940. A gift from my great-grandfather," he murmured. "There's more," Elizabeth continued. "I have a diary. I wrote down everything I saw and heard in that house for years. If it can serve as proof..." Elizabeth's diary revealed even more crimes. Not just against the three main families, but against dozens of small landowners, merchants, anyone who stood in the Colonel's way. The next meeting included representatives from 12 families. The conference room in Michael's office was packed. "This is getting bigger than we imagined," Catherine observed, visibly tense. "The question is..." One of the new participants, John Peterson, said, "We want a share too. Our families suffered just as much." Walter exchanged glances with Eleanor. They discussed this possibility. "Fair," Walter said, "but we need to be practical. We can't divide a mall among dozens of families." "Then what do you propose?" someone else asked. It was Eleanor who presented the idea. A foundation, managed by a board with representatives from all the affected families. The mall would be the main asset, but profits would go toward community projects. And who would decide those projects? Someone questioned. The community. Barbara, who had become an unofficial mediator, suggested public assemblies, votes, real democracy. The discussions went on for hours. There was distrust, old grievances, fears that one family might try to dominate the others. But gradually a consensus began to emerge. "We need legal guarantees," John Peterson insisted, "documents that prevent any family from taking total control." "I can draft that," Michael offered, "but it will need approval from independent lawyers representing each family." That was when Richard, who had stayed quiet most of the time, spoke up. "May I make a suggestion? How about including a clause that at least 30% of the board must always be made up of community members with no ties to any of the families?" "It would keep it from becoming an exclusive club," Walter acknowledged. "I like it, Catherine." Whitaker raised a delicate issue. "What about the current shop owners at the mall? Many are small business owners who aren't to blame for the past." "We protect their contracts," Eleanor suggested, "but new contracts would follow social criteria, priority for local businesses, social entrepreneurs." The negotiations continued for weeks. Every detail was discussed, every concern addressed. The press followed it all with fascination, and the story of the three families became a symbol of reconciliation and restorative justice. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One night, Walter received an anonymous call. "Stop this, or your family will face the consequences." "Who is this?" Walter asked, but the call was cut short. In the following days, other family members reported similar threats. Someone didn't want the agreement to move forward. "We should involve the authorities," Michael suggested in an emergency meeting. "No," Walter said firmly. "No police, we'll handle this our way." "But Walter," Catherine protested, "if there are real threats..." "Trust me," Walter insisted. "I have an idea who might be behind this." He was right. Through his network of contacts, he discovered that a group of investors had made an offer to buy the mall months earlier. With the legal dispute, the deal had been put on hold. "Follow the money," Barbara observed when Walter shared the discovery. "Always works." The leader of the investors was Henry Morgan, known for buying properties in legally complicated situations at low prices. "We need to confront him," Eleanor said. "No," Walter had another plan. "Let's invite him to the next community meeting, publicly. Let's see if he has the nerve to threaten 200 people at once." The community meeting was scheduled for a Saturday. The parish hall was packed with family representatives, neighborhood residents, shop owners, and onlookers. Henry Morgan showed up with his lawyers, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walter began, "we're here to decide the future not just of a mall, but of a community. But first, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Henry Morgan, who has shown interest in our project." Put on the spot, Morgan had no choice but to speak. My company made a legitimate offer for the mall. This circus is harming a legal business." "Circus?" Eleanor stood up. "Calling it a circus when families seek justice for being robbed?" "That's not what I meant." Morgan tried to backtrack. "What did you mean?" Walter stepped. Closer? When you called my house at 2 in the morning threatening my family. Indignant murmurs spread through the hall. I don't have proof it was you, of course, Walter continued. But it's curious how the threats started right. After your offer was rejected, that's slander. One of Morgan's lawyers protested. Maybe, Walter smiled. But let me make a counteroffer, Mr. Morgan. Your company can be part of the project, as the construction firm, helping renovate the mall for its new purpose. A fair, transparent contract, decided by the Foundation's board. It was a smart move. It offered Morgan an honorable way out and a legitimate business. I'd need to see the terms, Morgan said cautiously. Of course, Eleanor intervened. But first the threats stop. Immediately. Morgan gave a stiff nod and left the hall with his entourage. The threats did indeed cease after that day. The rest of the assembly was dedicated to presenting the full project to the community. Plans for the school, the health center, the farmers' market, cultural spaces. It sounds like a dream, an elderly woman remarked. But how do we know it will work? It was Barbara who answered. Because this time, it's not one man deciding for everyone. It's all of us together building what we want. The vote was overwhelmingly in favor of the project. Tears were shed, hugs exchanged. Decades of injustice were beginning to be repaired. But the road ahead would still be long. The legal processes took months. Every document had to be verified, every contract rewritten. Michael worked tirelessly, coordinating a team of volunteer lawyers. During that time, Walter developed a routine. Every morning he visited Margaret's grave, sharing the progress. We're doing it, sis, just the way you wanted, with unity, not division. It was during one of these visits that he made a surprising discovery. A young woman he didn't recognize was leaving flowers at the grave. Excuse me, she said when she saw him. Margaret saved my life once. I come here to thank her. I'm her brother, Walter introduced himself. I know who you are. The young woman smiled. My name is Jennifer. Margaret spoke a lot about you. She said one day you'd change this city. Margaret exaggerated, Walter said, moved. No, Jennifer disagreed. She knew. She said you had a purpose even if you didn't know what it was yet. She told her story. Years ago, pregnant and abandoned, she had attempted suicide. Margaret found her, took care of her, helped her rebuild her life. Now I'm a nurse, Jennifer revealed, because of her. And there are more like me. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all touched by Margaret's kindness. Walter had an idea. Jennifer, would you like to work at the health center we're creating? In Margaret's honor? The young woman's eyes filled with tears. It would be an honor. Little by little, the project took on a life of its own. People inspired by the story of the three families began offering help. Architects created pro bono designs. Teachers volunteered for the future school. Artists proposed murals telling the story. Catherine Whitaker surprised everyone by announcing she was leaving her executive role in the family business to dedicate herself fully to the project. I've spent my life building the empire my grandfather started with blood, she said at a meeting. I want to spend the rest of it building something with love. Her brothers followed her example, restructuring the family businesses for more ethical and transparent practices. But it was Richard who made the most dramatic gesture. He sold all, his personal properties, and donated the money to the foundation. I don't need any of it, he said simply. I've lived 40 years with the weight of silence. Now I want to live lightly. The physical transformation of the mall began a year after that first confrontation between Walter and the security guards. It was a symbolic event, the three families together, taking the first hammer swing at the wall that would separate the new community wing. Tearing down walls, Eleanor said, raising the hammer, literally and figuratively. The process wasn't without challenges. There were debates over priorities, disagreements about methods, moments when it seemed old resentments might resurface. During one particularly tense occasion, when Johnson and Thompson disagreed about the school's location, it was Barbara who stepped in. So you're arguing the way your grandfathers would have argued, she said. As friends who want what's best, not as enemies, remember that. The remark broke the tension, and a compromise was reached. As the project progressed, it began attracting national attention. Universities sent researchers to study the model, and other cities wanted to replicate the experience. "We've become a success story," Michael joked in a meeting. "Not yet," Walter corrected him. "Success will come when the first child graduates from our school, when the first patient is treated at the health center. For now, these are just promises." 2 years later, those promises began to materialize. The inauguration of the Benjamin, Johnson and Augustus Thompson School was an event that stopped the city. Walter gave the opening speech with his grandfather's watch in his pocket. "Today we're not just opening a school, we're opening a future where a last name doesn't determine destiny, where skin color doesn't limit dreams, where unity is stronger than division." In the crowd, among hundreds of moved faces, he saw Jennifer, now the coordinator of the Margaret Johnson Health Center, which would open the following month. He saw the grandchildren of other affected families, now part of the foundation's board, working together. He saw Catherine Whitaker embracing Eleanor Thompson, 2 women who had turned a legacy of hate into an inheritance of hope. "Margaret would be proud," Gloria whispered beside him. "She is," Walter corrected, looking at the sky. "She is." But the story still held surprises. During the expansion work, laborers found something buried under the old parking lot. It was a chest, even older than the box found under the Jequitiba tree. Inside were documents dating back to the 19th century, and a letter written by Benjamin Johnson for future generations. Walter read it aloud to the assembled board. "To my descendants and the descendants of my companions, if you're reading this, the time of division has passed, and the hour of unity has come. I bury these documents with the hope that one day, when hearts are ready, the full truth will be revealed. Augustus Thompson, Arnold Whitaker, and I were not just partners. We were brothers in spirit, orphans taken in by the same man, Father Joseph, who taught us that family is more than blood. Arnold lost himself to greed, but I pray his descendants find their way back. The lands you dispute are not just land. They are the dream of 3 boys who wanted to create a world where other orphans could have what we had, a chance. Let this soil be not a cause for conflict, but a garden where all may flourish. With love and hope, Benjamin Johnson, 1889. The silence in the room was absolute. Catherine was the first to cry, followed by others. The revelation that the 3 patriarchs were brothers changed the entire narrative. "We're literally family," Matthew murmured. "All this hate, all this division among family." Eleanor took Catherine and Walter's hands. "Then let's act like family. A family that argues, disagrees, but in the end comes together for what matters." Benjamin's letter was framed and placed at the entrance of the new complex. It became an even more powerful symbol of the project. 5 years after that first confrontation at the mall, Walter sat again on the same bench, where it all began. But now the surroundings were unrecognizable. Where designer stores once stood, there were now classrooms full of children learning. The sound of laughter replaced the ringing of cash registers. "Mr. Walter," a young voice called out. It was Brian, the former security guard who had approached him years ago. Now he coordinated community security for the complex. "Brian," Walter smiled. "How are things?" "Couldn't be better," Brian replied, sitting beside him. "You know, I never properly apologized for that day." "No need," Walter reassured him. "You did me a favor. If you hadn't approached me, perhaps none of this would have happened." "Did you plan all this?" Brian asked, still amazed. "I planned to seek justice," Walter admitted, "but what I found was far better. I found family, purpose, redemption." They watched in silence as children from different backgrounds played together in the courtyard, under the shade of the old oak tree. "You know," Brian said, "my son studies here now. Yesterday he asked me why the school has 2 names. I explained the history, about the families, the injustices, the reconciliation." "And what did he say?" "He asked why adults make things so complicated," Brian laughed. "To him it's simple. Everyone is human, everyone deserves respect." Walter laughed too. Out of the mouths of children, Margaret used to say the same thing. Barbara appeared, now officially the cultural director of the complex. "Walter, Eleanor is looking for you. The meeting about the expansion is about to start." "Expansion?" Brian asked. 3 neighboring communities want to replicate the model, Walter explained, standing up. Seems our little revolution is spreading. As he walked to the meeting, Walter passed by the Margaret Johnson Memorial, where photos and stories of those she had helped were displayed. He paused for a moment, as he always did. We did it, sis, and this is just the beginning. In the meeting room, the expanded council waited, representatives from the new communities, members of the original families, local leaders. Before we begin, Eleanor said, I'd like to propose a moment of silence for all who suffered so we could be here today. Heads bowed, memories honored. When the silence ended, Catherine spoke. What we've built here proves change is possible, but every community is unique. We don't want to impose a model. We want to share lessons. The discussion that followed was rich, full of ideas and possibilities. Each community had its own historical wounds, its own injustices to mend. The important thing, Walter added, is the principle, turning pain into purpose, division into unity. A young representative from one community raised his hand. Walter, how did you handle those who opposed you? Those who preferred keeping things as they were? Walter exchanged glances with Eleanor and Catherine before answering. With patience and persistence, showing results, not just promises, and most of all including rather than excluding, even those who opposed us had legitimate fears that needed to be heard. Not everyone changed their minds, Catherine added, honestly, but most did when they saw the real benefits for the community. The meeting lasted hours, with work groups forming, schedules set, partnerships outlined. At the end, as everyone said their goodbyes, Richard approached Walter. At 87, he had become a beloved figure in the complex, always telling stories to the children. Walter, I have something for you. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. I found this in my brother's papers. Thought you should have it. Walter opened the envelope. Inside was a photo of 3 boys, no older than 10, hugging and smiling. On the back, an old handwritten note, Benjamin, Augustus, and Arnold, brothers forever, 1870. My God, Walter murmured. They were so young. Before everything happened, Richard said sadly, before the greed, the hatred. Just 3 orphans who loved each other like brothers. Walter looked at the old man. Richard, were you the only one in your family who knew the truth? My father told me on his deathbed, Richard confirmed. He said his brother had betrayed Father Joseph's memory, betrayed the brothers they grew up with. He asked me to keep the secret until it was time to set things right. And you waited all these years. I was afraid, Richard admitted, afraid of my brother, afraid of tearing the family apart. But when I saw you all in action, when I saw Margaret's courage even while sick, I knew it was time. Walter placed his hand on the old man's shoulder. You did the right thing, at the right time. Months passed. The model of reconciliation and social transformation began gaining international recognition. Delegations from other countries came to study how past injustices could be turned into restorative justice. One special morning, Walter received a call that left him speechless. Dad, Michael sensed the emotion. What happened? It was UNESCO, Walter said, still processing. They want to document our project as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity, an example of how to heal historical wounds. The news spread quickly. For many in the community, it was proof that their struggle, their pain, and their resilience mattered to the world. The recognition ceremony was scheduled for the Foundation's 5th anniversary. Preparations took over the complex. We need to tell the whole story, Eleanor insisted in an organizing meeting. Not just the pretty parts, the ugly ones too. It's the complete truth that has the power to transform. They decided to create a permanent exhibit with original documents, the Colonel's recordings, letters and photographs. A memorial not just for the suffering but for the triumph. Jennifer, who besides coordinating the health center had become an informal historian of the project, was tasked with organizing the testimonies. I want to include everyone, she said, from the patriarchs to the children studying here today. Every voice matters. The work revealed even more stories. Families quietly helped, reconciliations that happened in the hallways, lives transformed in small and big ways. One story in particular touched everyone. Two elderly men, John Johnson and Peter Thompson, distant cousins who hadn't spoken in 50 years because of family disputes, had reunited at a farmer's market in the complex. "We spent our whole lives hating each other over something our grandparents did," John said in his testimony. "We wasted decades, but we still had time to become friends again. Our grandchildren play together now." On the eve of the ceremony, Walter took his usual nighttime walk through the complex. Every space told a story. Every wall was a witness to transformation. In the memorial garden, where plaques honored those who had passed before seeing the dream realized, he stopped in front of Margaret's. Margaret Johnson, nurse, sister, visionary. She tended to bodies so others could heal souls. "Tomorrow, the world will know," he whispered. "Your story, our story, proof that love conquers hate always." The day of the ceremony dawned clear and sunny. People arrived early, many dressed in their finest. It was a day of pride for the entire community. Walter, Eleanor, and Catherine, as representatives of the three original families, were the main hosts, but they decided to share the stage with representatives from all affected families. "We are all the protagonists of this story," Catherine said, adjusting the microphone. The UNESCO representative, a Frenchman named Philip, gave the opening speech. "What we witness here transcends borders and cultures. It is proof that humanity can choose reconciliation over retaliation, unity over division. This is not just an American project, it is America's gift to the world." When it was Walter's turn to speak, he pulled two objects from his pocket, his grandfather's watch and the photo of the three orphaned boys. "This is a story about time," he began. "Time lost in hatred, time needed to heal, time invested in building, and about family, not the one blood dictates, but the one the heart chooses." He told the full journey from that day at the mall to the present moment. He didn't hide the difficult moments, the doubts, the near failures. If there's one lesson, he concluded, it's that it's never too late to mend what was broken. It's never too late to choose love over fear. The ceremony continued with cultural performances, testimonials, and tours of the complex, but the most moving moment came at the end. A child of about 8 years old stepped onto the stage. It was Bethany, the great-granddaughter of John Johnson and Peter Thompson, the cousins who had reconciled. "I wrote a song," she said shyly. "They're about the 3 trees." She began to sing in a clear voice. "3 seeds planted together grew up wanting to be sisters, but the wind of greed made them drift apart. Years of rain and storm, each one suffering alone, until new branches are decided to entwine. Now they are a forest where all can find shelter. 3 trees, 1 family forever to thrive." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Walter embraced Eleanor and Catherine, the 3 of them united in tears. "From children," Eleanor whispered. "Wisdom always comes from children." The event ended with the planting of 3 saplings, 1 for each original family, but planted so close together they would grow intertwined. In the months that followed, the impact of the ceremony was felt. Donations poured in from around the world to expand the project. Universities offered partnerships. Governments sought consultation. But for Walter, the real success lay in the small moments. Like when he saw a wealthy businessman enroll his son in the public school of the complex, because here he'll learn real values. Or when the former security guard Kevin, who had been part of that first encounter, graduated with a law degree through the adult education program at the center. "I want to defend others' rights," Kevin said at graduation, "like you defended ours, even when we didn't deserve it." A year after UNESCO's recognition, Walter received an unexpected visit. A young woman, perhaps 30, with features that seemed strangely familiar. "Mr. Walter, my name is Louise Whitaker Morgan. I'm the daughter of Henry Morgan and the granddaughter of Colonel Whitaker on my mother's side." Walter tensed. Henry Morgan, the investor who had threatened the project early on. "I came to apologize," she continued, "and to ask to be part of this. I grew up hearing the official family stories, but I always knew something was wrong. When I discovered the full truth, She began to cry. "I have a 5-year-old daughter. I don't want her to grow up with the weight of this legacy of hate. I want her to be part of the solution." Walter studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Everyone is welcome here, especially those who choose to write a different story from the one they inherited." Louise became one of the most dedicated volunteers at the complex, working especially with the conflict mediation program. "It's my way of making amends," she once said, "using the negotiation skills I inherited, but to unite instead of divide." The project continued to grow and evolve. New partnerships, new challenges, new victories, but Walter began to feel the weight of the years. At a routine checkup, the doctor was blunt. "Mr. Walter, you need to slow down. Your heart—" "My heart is exactly where it needs to be," Walter interrupted, "doing what it needs to do." But he knew the doctor was right. He began delegating more, preparing the next generation of leaders. At a board meeting, he made the announcement. "I think it's time to pass the torch. I'm not going anywhere, but the young ones need to lead." There were protests, but Walter stood firm. This project is about the future, and the future belongs to them. It was decided that leadership would rotate among representatives of the different families and the community. Jennifer was chosen as the first general coordinator. "It's an honor I don't deserve," she said, moved. "Margaret would disagree," Walter replied. "She saw in you what you're still discovering." The transition had been smooth. Walter remained as an advisor, but now had more time for what he truly loved: talking with people, listening to stories, watching the children grow. One particular afternoon, he was sitting under the oak tree when a boy approached. "Sir, is it true you started all this?" Walter laughed. "Me? No, young man. This began a long time ago, with 3 orphaned boys who wanted to create a family. I just helped finish what they started." "But you're a hero," the boy insisted. "There are no heroes in this story," Walter corrected gently. "Just people who chose love over fear. And you know what? You can make that choice too, every day." The boy seemed to think about it before smiling and running back to his friends. Walter closed his eyes, feeling the sun on his face. He could hear the voices of children playing, teachers instructing, patients being cared for, vendors selling their goods. It was the sound of life, of community, of family. His phone rang. It was Michael. "Dad, there's something you need to—" "See, we found more documents during the West Wing renovation." "More secrets?" Walter asked, both weary and curious. "Not exactly. They're plans. Original sketches by Father Joseph for an orphanage he wanted to build. Dad, they're exactly like our current blueprints." As if he foresaw all of this, Walter felt a shiver. "Or maybe," he said slowly, "we were meant to complete his dream from the very beginning." He stood with some effort and began walking toward the office. Along the way, he passed Barbara organizing an art exhibit, Catherine teaching mediation to a group of young people, Eleanor reading stories to children in the library. Each had found their place, their purpose in that shared dream. In the office, Michael showed him the drawings. They were detailed, visionary for their time. Community, spaces, learning areas, gardens for cultivation. "Look at the date," Michael pointed out. 1869, a year before the photo of the 3 boys. "He already knew," Walter murmured. "Father Joseph already knew what those boys could build together." Among the papers was a letter. The handwriting was shaky, that of an elderly person. "To those who come after, today I plant the seeds not of what I will see bloom, but of what I know will one day bear fruit. 3 boys came to me with nothing but the need for love. In them I see the future of this place. Benjamin has the wisdom of the land. Augustus, the vision of what's possible. Arnold, the energy to make it happen. Together they are unstoppable. Apart they will be lost. If you are reading this, the time of harvest has come. May the descendants complete what the ancestors dreamed. With faith in tomorrow, Father Joseph Anthony, 1869. Walter had to sit down. The circle was complete. What had seemed like a quest for justice had from the beginning been the fulfillment of a destiny mapped out by a visionary priest. "We need to share this," Michael said. "Yes," Walter agreed, "but not just that. We need to finish what he started. These plans, we can adapt them, bring them to life." The discovery gave new momentum to the project. The story of Father Joseph and his prophetic vision captured everyone's imagination. Architects worked to adapt the old designs to modern reality while preserving their essence. "It's like we're building on foundations that were already there," the lead architect remarked. "Spiritual foundations, not physical ones." The orphanage dreamed of by Father Joseph became a welcome center for children in vulnerable situations. But with one difference: the children weren't isolated from the community, but integrated into it. "Family is who we choose," Jennifer explained to visitors. "And here we choose everyone." Walter oversaw every step of the construction, even against medical advice. He was as stubborn as ever. It was during the inauguration of the Father Joseph Welcome Center that Walter had what doctors later called a cardiac event. But he preferred to call it a moment of clarity. He was giving his speech when he felt the pain in his chest. But instead of stopping, he continued. "Father Joseph wrote about seeds. Today we see the forest that grew from them. But forests also plant seeds. Every child here, every person touched by this place, is a new seed." He had to pause, his hand on his chest. Michael rushed to help him, but Walter signaled for him to wait. "My time is coming to an end," Walter continued, his voice weaker but determined. "But the time for this dream is just beginning. I promise you, every child here today, that as long as there is love, as long as there is unity, this place will endure." Finally, he allowed Michael to support him. He was taken to the Margaret Johnson Health Center, ironically the very place he had helped create. "Stubborn as always," the on-duty doctor said, recognizing him. Mrs. Miller was the same. "Family, right?" In the days that followed, as Walter recovered, the entire community rallied. Prayer vigils, regardless of religion. Handmade cards from the children. Stories shared about how he had touched lives. Gloria never left her husband's side. "You scared me," she said when he woke up. "Sorry, my love, but I had to finish the speech," Walter said with a weak smile. "Of course you did," she shook her head. 50 years of marriage, and you still surprise me." During his recovery, Walter received constant visitors. Each brought a story, a memory, a thank you. It was Catherine who brought the most surprising news. "Walter, remember Louise, Colonel Whitaker's granddaughter, who asked to join us?" "Of course. How is she?" "She found something. In her grandfather's personal archives, there was a safe no one could open. She finally managed it." Catherine pulled an envelope from her bag. "It's a letter from Colonel Whitaker, written days before he died but never sent." Walter took the letter with trembling hands. "To those I harmed, I write these words knowing they are not enough. I spent my life building an empire on the shattered dreams of others. Now at the end I see I built only emptiness. I betrayed my brothers in all but blood. Yes, Benjamin and Augustus were my brothers in every way that mattered. Father Joseph raised us as equals, but I chose to see myself as superior. I do not ask for forgiveness, for I know I do not deserve it. But I leave this confession, and all the true documents, in the safe. One day, I hope, someone in my family will have the courage I lacked. To the Johnsons and Thompsons, you were right. The land belonged to everyone. I was the one who was wrong. Arnold Whitaker, 1995. Walter closed his eyes, processing the words. He knew. In the end, he knew. "Louise wants to use this," Catherine continued, "to fully clear our family's names, make the confession public." "And you?" Walter asked. "The Whitaker family. We're unanimous, the truth, the whole truth. It's the only path to real redemption." The publication of the Colonel's letter sent shockwaves across the country. For the first time, there was a full first-hand confession of the crimes committed. But more important than the confession were the actions that followed. The Whitaker family, led by Catherine and her brothers, established a historical reparations fund. "We cannot undo the harm," Matthew explained at a press conference, "but we can ensure good prevails from here on." Walter watched it all from his hospital bed. His heart warmed despite his physical struggles. "See," Eleanor said during a visit, "even the Whitakers found their way back." Weeks later, Walter was finally discharged. He insisted on walking through the complex, seeing every change, every new development. At the Father Joseph Welcome Center, he found Richard telling stories to the children. The old man, now nearly 90, had found his calling late in life. And that's how 3 orphaned boys became brothers, Richard concluded. "Uncle Richard," a little girl asked, "did they fight a lot?" "Yes," Richard answered honestly. "But do you know the secret? Even when they fought, they never stopped loving each other, and in the end, love always wins." Walter approached quietly. The children recognized him immediately. "Mr. Walter!" They ran toward him. "Be careful with him," Richard warned. "Uncle Walter is still recovering." But Walter was already kneeling, hugging the children. "I'm fine," he assured them. "A child's hug is the best medicine." He spent the afternoon with them, sharing his own stories and listening to theirs. It was in these moments that he felt Margaret's presence most strongly. That evening there was a special council meeting. Jennifer had called all the founding members. "We have an important decision to make," she began. "We've received proposals for international expansion. NGOs from Africa and Latin America want to replicate our model." The discussion grew heated. Some thought it was too soon, while others saw it as an opportunity to spread their message. "What do you think, Walter?" Eleanor asked. Walter thought carefully before answering. Father Joseph dreamed of this specific place, but the principles, love, unity, restorative justice, those are universal. If we can help others build their own dreams, we should. It was decided to create an international mentorship program, not to export their model, but to share lessons so each community could create its own version. Louise Whitaker Morgan volunteered to lead the program. "It's time for the Whitaker family to use our influence for good," she said. The following months were filled with intense activity. Delegations came and went, partnerships formed, and seeds were planted in distant soil. Walter watched it all, with satisfaction but also growing weariness. His body was paying the price. It was Gloria who finally confronted him. "Walter Johnson, you need to accept you're not a young man anymore." "I know," he admitted. "But there's still so much to do." "And there always will be," she said gently. "That's the beauty of what you've built. It will keep growing with or without you." It was a hard truth to accept, but a necessary one. On the project's 10th anniversary, a grand celebration was held. Walter insisted on attending every event against medical advice. During the main ceremony, 3 young people took the stage, the first graduates of the school who had now returned as teachers. "We grew up here," one of them said. "Here we learned that our past doesn't define our future. Now we want to teach that to others." Walter openly wept. The circle was complete. The seeds had become trees, now planting new seeds themselves. That night, after the celebrations, Walter asked to be alone in the memorial garden. He sat on the bench beneath the oak tree, the very place where it all began. "We did it, Margaret," he murmured. "Your dream, Dad's dream, Grandpa's good, we did it." The wind rustled the leaves softly like a reply. It was Barbara who found him hours later, asleep on the bench. But it was no ordinary sleep. Walter had passed peacefully in the place where his journey of transformation had started. Walter Johnson's funeral was unlike anything the town had ever seen. It wasn't an event of mourning, but of celebration. Thousands attended, each with a story of how he had touched their lives. Michael gave the main speech, holding his great-grandfather's pocket watch. "My father always said this was about time," he said. "Now I understand better. It's not about how much time we have, but what we do with it. My father used his time to heal the wounds of generations." Eleanor spoke about the unlikely friendship born from conflict. "Walter taught me that enemies are just friends who haven't met yet, that inherited hatred can be transformed into chosen love." Catherine represented the Whitaker family. "Walter gave us something money can't buy, the chance for redemption, to turn a legacy of shame into an inheritance of pride. But it was a surprise at the end that moved everyone. The children from the Father Joseph Welcome Center took the stage and sang Bethany's song about the 3 trees, now the official anthem of the complex. When they reached the final verse, the entire crowd joined in. "Now they are a forest, where all can find shelter. 3 trees, 1 family, forever to prosper. Walter was buried beside Margaret in the small cemetery that curiously lay within the original boundaries of the disputed land. Fitting, Richard remarked. He's literally planted in the soil he fought for. In the days that followed, as life in the complex continued, it was discovered that Walter had left specific instructions. Each family received a personal letter. For Eleanor, words about late but true friendship. For Catherine and her siblings, about courage and redemption. For Barbara, about how small gestures can change stories. But the most important letter was addressed to future generations. To those who come after, I leave you not property or money, but something more valuable, proof that change is possible. You will inherit a world with its own injustices. Do not lose heart. Remember that 3 orphaned boys divided by hatred had descendants who chose love. Don't wait for heroes. Be the change yourselves. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start where you are with what you have. And above all, remember, we are all family. Some discover this early, others late. I learned it at 63, but there was still time. There's always time to choose love. With hope for tomorrow, Walter Johnson. The letter was framed and placed at the main entrance alongside Father Joseph's letter and Colonel Whitaker's confession. 3 documents, 3 eras, 1 message. A year after Walter's passing, the complex continued to grow. Jennifer, now a well-established executive director, kept the vision alive while adapting it to new times. Mr. Walter always said we shouldn't be stuck in the past, she explained to new volunteers. We honor history by building the future. Michael took on a more active role, balancing his law practice with work at the complex. It's my way of keeping my father present, he said. Eleanor, now the most respected elder on the council, became the keeper of the stories. Someone must remember, she said, so the lessons aren't lost. Catherine led the international expansion of the mentorship program. Within 2 years, 47 communities in 15 countries had started their own restorative justice projects. Each one different, she reported to the council, but all based on the same principle, turning historical pain into collective healing. It was in one of these communities, a small South African town still grappling with the wounds of apartheid, that the model faced its most significant test. 2 communities, divided by decades of racial hatred, used the principles learned in America to create their own reconciliation center. If it worked for you, the community leader said during a video call, it can work anywhere. Barbara, now in her 70s, remained tireless in cultural programming. Art heals, she insisted. Every play, every performance is a chance to touch hearts. Richard, defying all medical expectations, reached 95 lucid and active. He became a living legend, the last direct link to the generation that caused harm and chose good. My brother built walls, he told the children. I live to see you bring them down. 5 years after Walter's death, an archaeological discovery during an expansion uncovered artifacts from Father Joseph's old orphanage. Among them, a diary long believed lost, the priest's final words, written when he was already very ill. In my dreams, I see what this place will become. Where there are 3 boys today, there will be multitudes. Where there is poverty today, there will be abundance of spirit. Where there is separation today, there will be unity. I will not live to see it, but I die in peace, knowing I planted the seeds well. One day someone will come to reap, and when they come, may they find fertile soil. To my boys, Benjamin, Augustus, and Arnold, I forgive in advance the mistakes they will make. They are human, but I trust the love I planted in their hearts will prevail, even if it takes generations. May God bless this land and all who walk upon it. The public reading of the diary was a moment of profound emotion. It was as if Father Joseph himself was blessing everything that had been built. He knew, Eleanor murmured. He always knew it would work. The complex decided to create the Father Joseph Museum, not just about the past, but about the journey of transformation. Each room told a part of the story, with modern technology allowing visitors to experience the pivotal moments. The most impactful room was the Room of Forgiveness, where the voices of Walter, Margaret, Eleanor, Catherine, and others recounted their personal journeys from hatred to love. Students from across the country came to visit. One teacher remarked, "It's living history. My students leave here understanding they can change the world." On the 10th anniversary of Walter's death, the Three Roots People's University was inaugurated, offering free higher education focused on social justice and community development. The dean, one of the first students from the original school, said in his opening speech, "Walter Johnson believed education was the key. Today we give that key to anyone who wants to open doors." Gloria, now a widow for a decade but still active at 75, cut the ribbon. "Walter would be proud," she said simply. "But he'd also tell us not to stop here, and they didn't stop. The model continued evolving, adapting to new challenges. Environmental issues were incorporated, with the complex becoming carbon neutral. Technology was embraced with digital inclusion programs, but the core remained the same, turning division into unity, hatred into love, injustice into opportunity. Jennifer, in her annual report, wrote, "We began as 3 families seeking justice for old grievances. Today we are thousands of families building justice for the future. Walter Johnson showed us the way, but the path is now ours to walk." 20. Years after that first confrontation at the mall, the place was unrecognizable. Where there had been empty consumerism, there was purpose. Where there had been exclusion, there was welcome. An international journalist covering the 20th anniversary asked Eleanor, now a centenarian but still sharp, "Did you ever imagine it would come this far?" Eleanor smiled, the same wise smile Walter had so admired. "Walter used to say we were planting seeds, but even he couldn't have imagined this forest. That's the beauty of seeds. They always surprise the ones who plant them." The journalist visited every space, interviewed dozens of people. His conclusion was simple, but powerful. In a world divided by ever higher walls, one corner of America proves that bridges are stronger. That love, patiently nurtured, can heal wounds centuries old. As the sun set over the complex on that anniversary day, the 3 saplings planted years before had grown into majestic trees, their branches intertwined as promised. Beneath their shade, children of all colors and classes played together, unaware they stood on sacred ground, where hatred had died so love could be born. At the memorial of Walter and Margaret, fresh flowers were placed daily, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. Each flower, a life touched; each life touched, a new seed planted. Barbara, at 85, curated her final exhibition, titled Portraits of Transformation. It displayed before and after photos, not just of places but of people. "My legacy," she said at the opening, "is having witnessed the impossible become inevitable." Richard, against all odds, reached 100. His birthday was celebrated across the entire complex. "What's the secret to longevity?" they asked. "Purpose," he replied. "I lived wrong for 60 years, needed to live right for at least another 40 to balance the scales." That night, he asked to be taken to the original Jequitiba tree. Seated beneath the centuries-old tree, surrounded by great-grandchildren from all 3 original families, he told the full story one last time. "Once upon a time there were 3 orphaned boys," he began. The children listened, captivated to the saga of separation and reunion, of hatred and love, of injustice and redemption. "And what happened next?" a girl asked when he finished. Richard smiled and gestured around. "This happened, you happened, love won." He passed that night at peace, having kept his promise to guard the truth until it was time to reveal it. His funeral was the largest gathering of the 3 families, yet no distinction remained between Johnson, Thompson, or Whitaker. They were one family, united not by blood but by choice. The legacy kept growing. Public policies were influenced by their model. Restorative justice laws were passed. What began as a personal quest for justice had become a national movement. 30 years later, when Michael, now elderly, brought his grandchildren to see where it all began, the bench beneath the Jequitiba bore a plaque. Here Walter Johnson chose to turn hatred into love. May all who sit here make the same choice. "Grandpa," one grandchild asked, "was great-granddad really a hero?" Michael pondered the answer, recalling his father's words. "No, my child. He was something better. He was human. He stumbled, he rose, he fell, he stood. But he always chose love. And that's something any of us can do. The children ran off to play and Michael stayed there, feeling the presence of his father, Aunt Margaret, and all who had passed but lived on in what they'd built. The sun set, golden over the intertwined canopies of the Jequitibas. Somewhere Walter was smiling. The mission was complete, but the journey continued. Because that's the nature of true love. It doesn't die with the one who plants it. It grows, spreads, multiplies, until the whole world becomes its garden. And in that corner of Chicago, where 3 families chose forgiveness over vengeance, the garden flourished, a living promise that there's always time to choose love. End of story. Dear listener, did this journey of Walter and the 3 families move you? Share in the comments where you're watching from and what you thought of this story of resilience. Leave a like and subscribe for more heartwarming tales.